deal with long winter nights every year, but we know that spring and summer and the sun await us all as they await all Canadians now. Our government will be there to continue to help Canadians through what could be a dark winter. We will continue to base our decisions on data and facts, and will continue to build an economy that works for all Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Yukon will have 5 minutes of questions coming to him when we return to the topic. In the meantime, we'll go to statements by members. Déclaration de député, the honourable member for Winnipeg South.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to send my heartfelt congratulations to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers for the most successful regular season in their 92-year history. Although Winnipeg did not win the Grey Cup this year, your fans and the entire city of Winnipeg are grateful for the exciting season you brought us. I would also like to congratulate the Toronto Argonauts for their Grey Cup victory. Your team had an excellent season and put on a gritty and impressive championship performance. The Bombers were led by Mike O'Shea, who won his second consecutive Coach of the Year award, and quarterback Zach Collaros, who won his second consecutive trophy as the league's most outstanding player. A big shout out to the 4 hometown athletes who were on the Bombers roster this year, including Nick Dembski, Brad Oliveira, Jeff Gray, and Mike Benson, all of whom were born and raised in Winnipeg. We are so proud of you and the entire team. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary Signal Hill.
Mr. Speaker, like most members in this place, I took the time on Remembrance Day to honour those who sacrificed so much for us and give us the opportunity to participate in forums like this. At the same time, also recognizing the brave men and women of our Canadian Armed Forces. As too many Canadians take our freedom for granted, Mr. Speaker, and Russia's attack on the Ukraine should serve as a clear wake-up call. However, while we honour our brave men and women of the Canadian Forces, both past and present, this government must start reinvesting in our military. Our funding is inadequate, our equipment is out of date, and personnel are leaving the forces in greater numbers than are joining. Many of our veterans also need help, Mr. Speaker, and again, this Liberal government is failing to adequately address our veterans' situation. So, Mr. Speaker, whether it's the veterans that need help or our current state of our military, this government is failing.
The honourable member for St. John's East.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay respect to Mr. Bill Saunders, a Newfoundland veteran of the Second World War, who passed away last week at the age of 101. Mr. Saunders joined the Royal Navy at 18 years old and was at sea when the first Allied vessel liberated Hong Kong from the Japanese in August 1945. He went on to be a dedicated member of the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 1 for over 70 years, until the age of 98. The best way to describe Mr. Saunders is through a quote from the Legion Branch President. When he came through the door, everyone seemed to light up when they see him. And this just paints the perfect picture of the man he was: respected, a mentor, and a teacher. As the number of World War II veterans remaining falls, let's take this time to connect with veterans, hear their stories, and learn from them. What they experienced and fought for, we must never forget. We pay respect to Mr. Bill Saunders and think of his friends, colleagues, and family during this sad time. May he rest in peace.
L'honorable député de Salaberry.
The honourable member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Mr. Speaker, in Quebec, we celebrate the social economy during the month of November. When you buy a product or a service that comes from the social economy, the whole community benefits. The social economy is about supporting businesses that have the community and local service at the very heart of their mission. The social economy is made up of businessmen and women who are committed to quality of life and civic empowerment. It's made up of administrators who put quality of life ahead of the pursuit of profit at any cost. Mr. Speaker, Quebec's social economy is significant. It's a $47.8 billion business. 220,000 Quebecers are employed by 11,200 businesses that are working to change our economic logic. I commend the efforts of the Chantier de l'économie sociale, which is the social economy working group, the 22 regional hubs, and all the consumers across Quebec who are committed to the social economy. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Bloc Québécois, happy Social Economy Month.
L'honorable député de Vaudreuil.
The honourable member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges. Mr. Speaker, each year around the holidays, the people of my community of Vaudreuil-Soulanges work together to make the holidays a joyful time for all. And this year, this is more important than ever. I'd like to thank all the individuals and organizations in my riding who play a leadership role. Organizations like Moisson Sud-Ouest, which give food to 92 food banks and soup kitchens in my community and the community of Montérégie. I thank the incredible people who are doing this hard work day in and day out, like Stéphane Spizak, Marie-André Prévost, and the entire board, all employees and dedicated volunteers. While they do their hard work, I invite and encourage all members of our community to support them, and the easiest and the best way to do so is to donate generously to the Guignolé des Médias on December 1st.
For seniors, families, and kids over the holidays and into the new year, and I invite all members of my community of Vaudreuil-Soulanges who can to give generously. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Perth Wellington.
Mr. Speaker, in the summer of 1995, John Davidson pushed his son Jesse in his wheelchair across Ontario in what was known as Jesse's Journey. The purpose? To raise funds and awareness for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. In 1998, John walked across Canada to continue the journey. Along the way, he would break a Guinness World Record for the fastest crossing of Canada by foot. But more importantly, he raised another $1.5 million for Duchenne research. Since then, Jesse's Journey has granted more than $16 million in research funding. 27 years after all began, Jesse's Journey is now Defeat Duchenne Canada. The name might have changed, but the purpose remains, a world where those born with Duchenne can live long and healthy lives. John Davidson, representatives from Defeat Duchenne Canada, and Duchenne's families, like grade 7 student James Allen, who is living with Duchenne, are in Ottawa today. And I hope all members will join me in welcoming them to Ottawa and committing to the hard work and research and resources necessary to defeat Duchenne and other rare diseases. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Milton.
2, 3. Congratulations to the Toronto Argonauts on their record 18th Grey Cup victory, the most that any Canadian professional football team has ever won. Chad Kelly, the backup quarterback for the Argos, came on for the injured McLeod Bethel Thompson in the fourth quarter. A pair of touchdowns from A.J. Willett, and the Argos are once again champions with a hard-fought 24-23 victory over the strongly favored Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Toronto linebacker Enoch Mwamba had a key interception late in the game and was named the game's most valuable player and top Canadian. Enoch is only the second player in CFL history to be named both Most Outstanding Player and Most Outstanding Canadian in the Grey Cup championship game. After 11 years in the league, this is Enoch's first Grey Cup, and he credited the positive culture on his team and the support of his family for his success. To the players and the coaches, to the Argo staff and everyone in their locker room, to the families, supporters, and fans, to the incomparable, legendary Michael Pinball Clemens, we say congratulations, and thank you for playing the Canadian game with 3 downs, a larger field, and our rules. Once again, congratulations, Toronto Argonauts, to the Double Blue on your record 18th Grey Cup victory.
The honourable member for Canada, Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, this weekend I was honoured to march alongside Iranian Canadians as they demanded justice. Justice for PS 752, justice for Mahsa Amini, justice for victims of the Iranian regime's human rights violations. Canada shares their call for justice. Last week, our government announced another round of sanctions against the Iranian regime, targeting IRGC commanders, state-affiliated weapons firms, and UAV manufacturing companies. These sanctions prohibit dealings with the listed individuals and entities, effectively freezing any assets that they may hold in Canada and prohibit them from operating in our country. Canada will not hesitate to use all diplomatic tools at its disposal to respond to the Iranian regime's aggressions, whether in Iran or abroad. We will attain justice for victims of the flight of PS-752, for Massa, and for the Iranian people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Provencher.
Mr. Speaker, this coming Sunday is the first Sunday of what Christians call Advent. It is the first of 4 Sundays that anticipates the coming of Jesus. The Christian Church has seen this as a time of preparation to prepare for the celebration of the birth of Jesus the King. Here was God coming as a baby to live among us, to invite us into a personal relationship with Almighty God. Each Sunday in Advent represents God's promises of hope, peace, joy, and love. That's what God wants to bring into this broken world. We read in the Gospels of the wise men, the kings, the leaders of the time, bringing gifts to this baby, because something in this baby's coming, they knew, merged truth, justice, and mercy with this world. Still today, Jesus invites people to accept through faith the forgiveness that he offers and the gift of eternal life. Mr. Speaker, I wish you and all the members of this House and all Canadians across this beautiful country the hope, peace, joy, and love of Jesus throughout this Advent season.
The honourable member for York Centre.
Mr. Speaker, November 20th is National Child Day in Canada. This special day honours our commitment to upholding the rights of children through 2 historic events: the 1959 and 1989 signing and adoption of the UN Declaration and Convention on the Rights of the Child. This year's theme is 8 million rising. Across Canada, there's a growing movement of young change makers who are standing up for their rights and speaking up for their generation. National Child Day is an important occasion to reflect on the progress to date and for the challenges that remain, especially for Indigenous, racialized, and 2S LGBTQI+ kids. To support our children with the best start in life, our government introduced the Canada Child Benefit, lifting over 435,000 children out of poverty. It's building a nationwide system of high-quality, affordable childcare, and it's laying the groundwork for a national school food policy to help ensure children are well-nourished. And finally, Mr. Speaker, it's implementing the Canada Dental Benefit for children under 12. Mr. Speaker, children aren't just the future, they're leading in the present as well. Thank you.
Hear, hear. The honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, listen to this list of Canadians. Vanessa, a single mom in Calgary who just wants to use her minivan to drive her kids to school, to dance, and to sports. Cooper in Chilliwack, who uses his truck to drive from his shop to his clients to use his plumbing skills all around the region. Flora, who heats her home in Newfoundland with oil to keep her and her husband, Peter, warm. Jackie, who thinks twice about turning up the thermostat a degree instead of deciding to just put on a sweater. Mark, who gets in his big wheeler in Milton at the crack of dawn to deliver food to grocers. What do these Canadians have in common, Mr. Speaker? They're struggling to keep up with energy prices under this Liberal NDP coalition, and to this Prime Minister, they're just polluters.
The honourable member for Mission Matsky Fraser Canyon.
Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General recently released a report and the results are in. The federal government does not know if it is reducing chronic homelessness. 5 years have gone by since the launch of the federal government's national housing strategy, and yet there is no accountability for billions of dollars spent while more and more people are living in tents and cars. This is unacceptable, and it's only getting worse right across Canada. The federal government must develop a clear strategy with timelines and targets for ending chronic homelessness, including a definition with measurable targets. The Liberals' plan to announce large amounts of money with no follow-up and zero accountability is not working, and it's failing Canadians. Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation has already spent $4.5 billion and committed a $9 billion more to tackle homelessness, but cannot conclude if any of those funds have actually made a measurable difference. Canadians need leadership. Canadians need a plan. Canadians need homes built now. They can't afford more of this wasteful and bad bureaucracy from the Liberal government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I just want to remind, order, if I can have your attention. I just want to remind everyone that statements are being made, and there's very important stuff being said. I just want to make sure that everyone can hear everything. So if you're talking amongst yourselves, try whispering rather than talking across 3 benches or even across the floor. The Honourable Member for Etobicoke Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to commemorate the 89th anniversary of the famine genocide in Ukraine known as the Holodomor, when the Soviet Union closed Ukraine's borders and confiscated all food to destroy a Ukrainian population opposed to its rule. 19 people per minute, 1,200 per hour, and 28,000 per day were dying of famine at the height of the Holodomor. The world was silent, and millions died as a result. After World War II, we said never again. Year after year, here in this House, we commemorate genocides and atrocities, and we say never again. Right now, in Russian-occupied Ukraine, it is happening again. Russia is executing, Russia is torturing, Russia is raping women and even children. Russia is committing genocide in Ukraine. Let us learn the lessons of the Holodomor. The only way to stop this is for the world to help Ukraine liberate all occupied territories. If we do not do this, then millions of Ukrainians will become victims of a genocide. We will show that we didn't learn the lessons of the Holodomor, and we will have lost the right to ever again use the words never again.
The Honourable Member for New Westminster, Burnaby.
We have a healthcare crisis in Canada. I witnessed this firsthand over the past year as first my father and then my mother fell sick and went into palliative care. I witnessed the immense dedication of Canada's nurses, doctors, and healthcare workers. And I know, as we all do, how underfunding by this government has created a crisis in public health care. That crisis is clear to see in children's hospitals, in emergency rooms, everywhere. Our healthcare workers are overworked to the point of exhaustion. Patients are sleeping in hospital hallways because there is nowhere else to go. The Liberal government has been irresponsible here. Instead of providing adequate healthcare funding to provinces and territories, they gave $750 billion in liquidity supports to big banks to maintain their profits. The same government allows over $30 billion in taxes to go to loopholes for the ultra-rich and overseas tax havens every year. It must be a top priority to restore adequate healthcare funding so that seniors, children, families, everyone receives the healthcare support they deserve.
The Honourable Member for Drummond. Mr. Speaker, Jean Lapointe has left us. He lives on in our hearts. He made his mark as a comedian who made Quebecers laugh for decades. He will be remembered as a prominent actor in Quebec cinema, in films such as Les Ordres, L'eau chaude, L'eau frette, and Le Dernier Tunnel. He made an impression on us with his role as Duplessis, one of the most beautiful performances in the history of Quebec television. He will also be remembered as a singer-songwriter. Just think of C'est dans les chansons, Cyrano, Si on chantait ensemble, or Chante là ta chanson. But he will be remembered, above all, for his tenderness, his goodness that led him to help those who are in need. Since 1982, for alcoholics and drug addicts, being admitted to the Maison Jean Lapointe has been synonymous with hope, with recovery. Thousands of Quebecers, their families, and their loved ones are in his debt. Thousands, millions even, of Quebecers are grateful to him. A huge part of us is now gone. Mr. Speaker, to his family and all those who loved him, I offer on behalf of the Bloc Québécois my most heartfelt condolences.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since this government took office, failed Liberal policies have cost thousands of Canadians their lives. Unfortunately, in my province of Saskatchewan, drug overdose deaths are on the rise again this year. Addictions are terrorizing every community across this country and are the result of failed experiment by this Liberal government to provide taxpayer-funded drugs to addicts. This approach has failed in every jurisdiction it has been tried. Addiction can happen, Mr. Speaker, to anyone. It is a health crisis that unfortunately touches almost all families in this country. It feels like everything is broken in Canada, but there is hope. Our Conservative leader has a plan, a compassionate, health-based approach to provide recovery, treatment, and counseling. We need to fix the problem. We're losing too many sisters, brothers, parents, and friends to drugs.
The honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Canadians come from a vast range of nations, races, religions, and heritage. All Canadians can be proud of their identities, take pride in their ancestry, and have a sense of belonging. A community that brings Canadian society to life by sharing its identity is the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat Canada. We can all attest to the generosity, resilience, and commitment of Ahmadi Muslims through Humanity First, Mercy for Mankind, Muslims for Life, Muslims for Remembrance, and the Run for Canada. These are just a few initiatives led by the Ahmadiyya community in support of Canadians. Despite facing persecution and discrimination in many countries, Ahmadi Muslims strive to live up to the simple but profound message of love for all, hatred for none. As chair of the Ahmadiyya Parliamentary Friendship Group, please join me in welcoming the Ahmadiyya community to Parliament. Also, join us tonight as we continue to promote adherence to the values of human dignity and freedom of religion for all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions. Question orale. The honourable leader of the opposition.
Le Canada s'est rangé 58e.
Canada was 58th out of 63 countries in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. They have missed every target when it comes to reducing these emissions, but they continue with the same strategy. In fact, they want to triple their strategy by tripling the carbon tax, even when that means Canadians are having trouble paying their bills to heat their houses. When will they realize that this isn't the way to fight climate change? The Honourable Minister of the Environment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canada has one of the most detailed plans when it comes to fighting climate change, and we will hit our targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. We also need to make sure that life is affordable for Canadians, and we have made investments to ensure that that happens. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Plan in the world, why are they ranked 58th out of 63 in terms of performance on that plan? They have actually is a tax to drive up the cost of home heating, gas, groceries, and everything else. They want to triple that tax. Now we're going into the winter where families are facing a doubling of their home heating bills right across this country. 40% of Atlantic Canadians already live in energy poverty. They cannot afford to pay any more. Instead of spending more inflationary money to try and solve the problem that they caused, why don't they just get rid of the problem itself and get rid of the tax?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since 2015, this government has made enormous progress with respect to fighting climate change. We have one of the most detailed plans that exists in the world, but we were starting from a place where there was 10 years of Harper Conservatives that did nothing to fight climate change and to ensure a prosperous future for our children. We are working very hard to ensure that life is affordable for Canadians.
I'm just going to interrupt. I mean, we're going into what's pre-holiday season and known locally as the silly season. So I'm going to ask everybody to just take a deep breath and not shout out. I don't want to have to come down hard at Christmas and offer people coal. So please, no shouting or yelling. Et nous avons pas la traduction.
And we don't have translation?
I'd appreciate it if you didn't heckle the speaker. Otherwise, I might have to name you and throw you out. No, we don't want that to happen. Est-ce que nous avons, do we have translation? Very good. We'll let the Minister of Natural Resources from the top so we can all hear what was said.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canada has one of the most detailed climate plans in the world. We are on track to ensure that we are meeting the ambitious targets that we have set. But, Mr. Speaker, we started from a base where the previous Conservative government, the Harper Conservatives, did nothing to fight climate change for 10 years. We are very much committed, and we will achieve those targets. We will do so in a manner that is affordable for Canadians. 8 out of 10 Canadian families get more money back when they pay a price on pollution. It should not be free to pollute in this country, and we are certainly making investments like the announcement we made this morning of $250 million for heat pumps to ensure that we are actually moving forward in a manner that is affordable and fights climate change.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
By using technology and not taxes, the previous Conservative government actually presided over the only government that actually reduced greenhouse gases in Canadian history. While the economy grew. And now we have a government that has missed every single greenhouse gas reduction target that it has set, even as its carbon tax has gone up. And now they want to hit people with a tax just as home heating bills are expected to double. And their consolation prize is that sometime down the road, you might be able to get a heat pump when the winter is over, if you're lucky. Mr. Speaker, why don't they just get rid of the real problem, which is the tax?
The Honourable Minister.
I find the phrase that the honourable member uses, technology, not taxes, quite ironic for somebody who has actually spent his entire political career being paid by the taxpayer. I would note that as somebody who actually spent 20 years in the clean technology sector, that technology in and of itself is not a climate plan. It is part of a climate plan. It requires regulation. It requires putting a price on pollution. It requires investment in ensuring that life is affordable. Fighting climate change can generate prosperity, but only if you actually understand what you are doing.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Which he clearly doesn't, by virtue of the results. The results are higher emissions. They've missed their targets every single year. And now, with Atlantic Canadians, 40% of them living in energy poverty, rural Canadians facing a doubling of their home heating bills. Some families will be paying $5,000 and up just to keep the heat on. They want to go ahead and triple the tax. Why won't they get rid of the tax so that Canadians can keep the heat on and pay their bills?
The Honourable Minister for Veterans Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, we had a prime example in Prince Edward Island what will happen if we don't continue to address climate change. We have massive destruction, winds over 200 kilometers an hour, destroyed our wharves, destroyed over half our softwood forests. We have to continue to make sure that we address the climate change. That's what our government has been doing and will continue to do, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
And yet their taxes have failed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This is not an environmental plan, it is a tax plan. And now, having driven up the cost of home heating, they say that if you wait until the end of winter, you might be able to get a rebate for a heat pump if you are among the tiny minority of people in this country who will qualify for this program. So the tax the government imposed caused the problems, and now they say they have a government program to solve the problem. Why not just get rid of the problem and get rid of the tax?
The Honourable Minister for Official Languages.
Mr. Speaker, I really have to say I'm really quite stunned by the comments made by the other side of the floor here. When we look what happened this year in Atlantic Canada with Hurricane Fiona, I had the task of going to visit many provinces. I was actually in Prince Edward Island. One of the schools, the roof was actually blown off of the school completely. When I speak to Atlantic Canadians, they want our government to make sure that we take action on climate, and that's exactly what we're doing. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we have a plan. On that side of the House, they really don't know what they're talking about.
L'honorable député de la Prairie.
Mr. Speaker, Global News revealed that China interfered in the 2019 federal election by funding at least 11 candidates. The Prime Minister was briefed as early as January, but as usual, he says he doesn't know anything. At the G20 summit, he discussed it with Chinese President Xi Jinping. So supposedly he doesn't know anything, but he knows enough to discuss it with the second most powerful man on the planet. Did he discuss something as serious as interference in our elections just on the basis of a newspaper article? Or does he know the details and is hiding them from the public? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. We take safeguarding Canadian democracy very seriously. We have 2 independent, nonpartisan reviews that the 2019 elections were free and fair. We also passed Bill C-66 to deal with foreign interference through funding, and anyone who interferes with our elections will face serious consequences. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Okay, so either the minister didn't know who they were but isn't telling us, or knew about it and went to talk about with the president of China. Either he's hiding the truth and knows that China's trying to destabilize our democracy, just like he hid the truth about the Roxham road contracts, or he's revealing that he's diplomatically irresponsible to the point of being dangerous. Either it's not honest or it's not very bright. Which one is it? The Honourable Minister. The protection of Canadian democracy is a responsibility that we take very seriously. We're taking measures to fight attempts at foreign interference, starting with our police services, our officials, and intelligence officials who have led investigations. They use all the tools available. We are doing important work to preserve our institutions and infrastructure essential to Canada, namely through C-26 to reinforce cybersecurity and offer new powers to the RCMP. The Honourable Member for New Westminster Burnaby. This government refuses to recognize just how the greed of large companies makes life more expensive for families. We now know that since 2019, large grocery stores increased their profits by 118%. In the meantime, the Liberals refuse to point out the excessive profits leading to an increased cost of living. But they have no problem blaming workers' salaries for inflation. What hypocrisy? Why attack workers' salaries? Why aren't the Liberals pointing out the greed of business owners? The Honourable Minister of Tourism. Mr. Speaker, I respect my colleague and his question. It's clear in our budget that we've asked banks to pay their fair share. We've increased taxes on banks, and in our economic statement, we're added a 2% tax on share purchases. We're asking all businesses and we're asking everyone to pay their fair share. That businesses pay their fair share is part of our plan.
Mr. Speaker, that didn't even come close to answering the question. A new report reveals that the profits of big grocery stores have increased by 118% since 2019. Wow. These companies are making massive profits while Canadian families are struggling. In Alberta, food banks have seen a whopping 73% increase over the last 3 years. Yet the latest government report, the Liberals blame workers' wages for inflation. They don't blame the billionaires. They don't blame the skyrocketing corporate profits. They're blaming workers. When will the Liberals stop protecting corporate profits and start taking action to protect Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, we know that Canadians are concerned about how much they're paying for gas and groceries. That's why earlier this year, the Minister of Industry, Science and Innovation wrote to the Competition Bureau to make sure that it was using all of its tools to detect and deter unlawful behaviors in the food sector, following up to prevent businesses from taking advantage of high prices and profiting off Canadians. We've asked the Bureau to immediately look into these matters. Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to make life more affordable for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Today's re-announcement of more government spending doesn't address the real issue of inflation and unaffordability. This Liberal government has demonized and kicked down Canada's energy industry for years. Instead of building energy projects in Canada that would have helped make home heating more affordable, the Liberals cancelled projects, killing good energy jobs while helping China build pipelines instead. As the government keeps spending, it drives up inflation, making gas, groceries, and home heating more and more expensive. Why won't this Liberal government do the right thing and cancel their carbon tax on home heating?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And certainly I think it's unfortunate that it's only the Conservatives in this House that think it should be free to pollute in this country. It should not be free to pollute in this country. We need a plan, a comprehensive plan to fight climate change. That includes putting a price on pollution. It includes regulations. It includes investments in creating prosperity and jobs for the future, investments in ensuring affordability, just like the $250 million announced this morning to help to transition off home heating oil. That is something that will help people with affordability and fight climate change.
The honourable member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Well, instead of selling green fairy tales and telling Canadians to cancel their Disney Plus, the government should stop their inflationary spending and stop the plan to triple the taxes. Billions of dollars of cancelled projects because of this costly coalition's climate zealot ideology has made home heating unaffordable, while not hitting a single emissions reduction target. Why won't this Liberal government stop daydreaming, do the right thing, and cancel their carbon tax on home heating?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Environment Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as our Natural Resources Minister has said, we have the most ambitious climate plan in Canadian history. We've invested $100 billion since 2015, a $9.1 billion investment in our emissions reduction plan, Mr. Speaker. This is going to reduce pollution, this is going to drive innovation, and this is going to enable us to hit our very ambitious climate targets. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, 60% of Canadians pay more in carbon tax than they get back, and the Liberals plan to triple it. Home heating costs have already skyrocketed in Canada and will double this winter. Half of Atlantic Canadians use heating oil to heat their homes, and it's up 56% overall since last year. It's up 77% in Newfoundland and Labrador and 68% in Nova Scotia. Tripling the carbon tax will cost them $900 more a year just in tax to heat their homes. Why won't the Liberals cancel their carbon tax on home heating?
The Honourable Minister for Official Languages.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Once again, Mr. Speaker, as the Minister responsible for COA, I have had the challenge of going to Atlantic Canada and meeting with some people that have really seen the destruction in their homes and in their businesses. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, it's been really difficult to hear these personal stories. Once again, I'm really confused with respect to the Conservatives. It's truly important to make sure that we have a comprehensive plan to fight climate change, because we are seeing the destruction is extremely real. And that is why that we are really hoping that on this side of the House that we're going to be able to move forward as we are with an ambitious plan to make sure that we meet our targets. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable member for Lakeland.
Well, that minister just gave zero answers whatsoever about how to alleviate the cost of home heating on Atlantic Canadians and people right across the country. They need relief now. Canadians can't wait for programs that won't even cover half of the $10,000 to $20,000 it'll take to install a new home heating system that'll still need a backup. They can't wait a year to install new windows or re-insulate their home, or years to replace their furnace. Canadians live in the real world, not in a Liberal fantasy. In that real world, it gets really cold in December. Canadians are freezing and the Liberals are freezing them out. So why won't they cancel their cruel carbon tax on home heating?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, in Atlantic Canada just faced the worst climate catastrophe in their history, Mr. Speaker, just 1 month ago. And, Mr. Speaker, we're going to be there with $300 million to help them to recover and rebuild, Mr. Speaker. And we're also going to be there to help them with the transition to greener forms of energy, Mr. Speaker. There was a wonderful announcement this morning that is going to help Canadian families, is going to help Atlantic Canadian families. We're there for Atlantic Canadians, Mr. Speaker, ever and always.
L'honorable député de Louis-Saint-Laurent.
Monsieur le Président, COP27 vient de...
Mr. Speaker, COP27 just ended. The Canadian Minister of the Environment launched a challenge to the entire planet. He asked all countries to impose a carbon tax like his government is doing to all Canadians. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister of the Environment tell us how many countries accepted this invitation to impose a carbon tax? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, affordability is extremely important. We've taken important measures to deal with these issues, including doubling the GST credit. No matter what the Conservatives say, 8 out of 10 Canadians are better off thanks to our fight for the climate. They are misleading. They misled Canadians when they campaigned against the carbon tax. The Conservatives are breaking promises that they made during the election campaign to those who elected them. The member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to welcome the minister's efforts to speak in French. But no matter which language he uses, the answer is the same. No country accepted his invitation to oppose a carbon tax. The Liberals have been in power for 7 years. The carbon tax has been in place for 7 years, and the result is that emissions have not gone down. And we are 58th out of 63 countries to fight climate change. Can they understand that tripling the carbon tax is not good for all Canadians? The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my counterpart said, he knows that there are many countries throughout the world who impose a price on carbon. Many countries in Europe have a price on carbon. That's part of our climate plan, a comprehensive plan to fight climate change in a way that will accelerate the energy transition and prosperity for Canada. That's something we are working on every day. And perhaps...
Monsieur le Président, en matière de santé.
The Honourable Member Jonquière. When it comes to health, the minister came out a changed man after his meeting with François Legault after the Sommet de la Francophonie. He said that Quebec is doing a very good job in collecting data, a very good job. It's amazing how things move forward when we talk to each other. Mr. Speaker, just imagine how we could move forward if the Prime Minister brought together all of the premiers to resolve the issue of transfers together. My question is a simple one. When will the Prime Minister convene a public health care summit? It's been over a year. We've been waiting for this. The Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the question from my honourable colleague. Our healthcare system is dealing with significant challenges. Our government is ready to work with provinces and territories to discuss these priorities. We want to get results for health and improve health services for all Canadians. We want to reduce wait times and support healthcare workers. We want to improve services to families. And we want to improve mental health services as well as addiction services. And we want to help Canadians receive care closer to home. And I'm out of time. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. That's a really nice grocery list, but that's not what we're talking about. This is the first time in over a year that the Prime Minister has found anything good to say about Quebec or any other province when it comes to health transfers. All it took was one in-person meeting, Mr. Speaker. So let him organize meetings if they can lead to an agreement on healthcare funding. I have a very simple question for my colleague. Why is the federal government stubbornly refusing our proposal for a minister summit on health funding? What is there to be afraid of? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree with my colleague. Working together is the right road to take. As my colleague mentioned, federal, provincial, and territorial representatives have worked together to develop an action plan to improve use of health data. We also want to more effectively use data for health and digital health. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, we need to act now. He's really indulging in a lot of distraction. For over a year now, we've been needing increased funding for healthcare. In the meantime, people are on endless waiting lists for surgery. There's people who think they're sick, but they can't get a diagnosis. There's healthcare workers who are thinking about changing jobs. What all of these people are expecting from their government is to work together for better funding for healthcare. How much more precious time will the federal government waste before convening a public summit on healthcare funding? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, as we've seen, there was an excellent meeting between the Premier of Quebec and the Prime Minister of Canada. We do want to work with the other levels of government. I will say that the Bloc is looking for an argument, whereas we are looking to cooperate. While the Bloc Québécois is playing politics, we are trying to find solutions.
Member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Mr. Speaker, according to StatsCan, families in Atlantic Canada are hardest hit by the Liberals' carbon tax when it comes to home heating fuels. On a year-over-year basis, families in New Brunswick are facing increases to their home heating bills of over 50%, and it's over 75% in Newfoundland and Labrador. Liberals believe heat pumps will solve this problem, but their carbon tax is already forcing families to choose between heating and eating. When will Liberals do the right thing, cancel their carbon tax, and give families in New Brunswick and Atlantic Canada the break they need this winter?
The Honourable Minister for Official Languages.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what is clear on this side of the House is that my colleagues opposite are suffering from the ostrich syndrome with their head in the sand. I think we really have to recognize that the climate change is real, and we really have to take action. Once again, Mr. Speaker, as the minister responsible for COA, I have seen firsthand the devastation on the ground. And I think really what we do need right now in the province of New Brunswick is for the province to return the money on the federal tax to its constituents in New Brunswick as opposed to keeping it in the federal coffers. That's really what would be helping Atlantic Canadians right now.
The Honourable Member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Mr. Speaker, no one is taking that minister's advice. No one in Atlantic Canada wants to see home heating fuels double this year. Right. Nobody is asking the federal government to make heating more expensive. The Liberal carbon tax is fueling inflation. Even the Governor of the Bank of Canada says so. It is driving up the price on energy. It is driving up the price on food. It is driving up the price on life. When Ontario, Alberta, and New Brunswick were able to reduce taxes on gasoline, home heating fuels, we saw prices go down. Under this government, they're going up because they keep raising the carbon tax, and they're going to triple. They need to stop.
The Honourable Minister of Veterans Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Anybody that witnessed Fiona in Atlantic Canada would understand there truly has to be measures taken. And this government has taken measures to make sure that we're going to be able to live in Atlantic Canada. And in fact, the heat pump announcement is a very important part of making sure that we help Atlantic Canadians heat their homes this winter. We have and will continue to address the climate change issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Coast of Bay Central Notre Dame.
Mr. Speaker, what that minister just said was a pile of baloney. He should do a meteorology course. Back home today, winter is setting in. Newfoundlanders and Labradorians are cutting their Disney Plus subscriptions left, right, and center. But what they're finding with their Disney Plus savings is that it doesn't even give them 1 gallon of oil per month. Will this left-wing government do the right thing and cancel their plan to put carbon tax on Atlantic Canadians' fuel this winter?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think the one thing that we can agree on across the aisle is that affordability is very important.
No baloney. Fried bologna sandwiches first.
You've got all day. Take your time. Okay? The Honourable Minister from the top, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the one thing that we can all agree on across the aisle is that affordability is extremely important to Canadians and certainly to all political parties. We have taken significant measures to address current affordability concerns through doubling the GST tax credit and this morning through the investment of $250 million to accelerate the transition off of home heating oil. It is also the case, no matter how much the Conservatives attempt to mislead folks, that 8 out of 10 Canadian families in places where the federal backstop is in place get more money back than they actually pay in the price on pollution. It also bears stating that the Conservatives misled Canadians during the recent election campaign when they campaigned on putting in place a carbon tax. Seeing their...
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite Patrie. Mr. Speaker, we've just wrapped up COP27, and the world can see that on the climate crisis, the Liberals say one thing and do another. Apart from Japan, Canada is the only country, the country that gives the most to oil companies in the G20. According to the Climate Change Performance Index, Canada ranks 58th out of 63 countries evaluated. Bravo, impressive. And what's more, the Minister of the Environment was inviting oil company lobbyists to the Canadian Pavilion during COP, even though we were talking about a catastrophe. When will they get a serious and coherent policy and wake up? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's very important to fight climate change, and as I said, we have implemented a detailed plan to fight it, and it will accelerate the prosperity for Canada, and our government has committed to eliminate public financing of fossil fuels by the end of 2022. We've already gradually emulated subsidies for the fossil fuel sector.
Timmins James Bay.
Well, winter's hitting hard across northern Canada, and Canadians are struggling with the rising cost of home heating, particularly in rural regions like my own where people are on fixed incomes. Oil companies are making record profits. Canadians are paying through the nose. And, of course, the Conservative solution is to make pollution-free for big oil, which is great for the shareholders. Now, as for the heat pumps, if people can't pay their bills now, they're not going to be able to afford the rest of the cost of the installation. But there is something this government can do. They can work with New Democrats to take the GST off home heating so that seniors and the working class can have a better deal this winter. Will they work with us?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment.
Speaker, and a number of members have mentioned COP27, and I'd like to put on the record, Mr. Speaker, that we have been praised for our international leadership in helping developing nations adapt to climate change. Mr. Speaker, you don't like coal, neither do we, and we've been praised for our leadership on the Powering Past Coal Coalition, Mr. Speaker. We're on the offense, Mr. Speaker, and unfortunately the Conservatives are ragging the puck.
The Honourable Member for Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, as Canadians continue to weather the post-pandemic storm, increased cost of living and housing affordability is top of mind in my community. In Richmond Hill, emergency housing operators such as Blue Door and 360 Kids strive to help the most vulnerable children, youth and adults in the face of poverty vulnerability. This is why I was pleased to see the government take action in the new cost of living measures, including increased financial support through the Canada Housing Benefit as a way of helping the most vulnerable in our communities. Mr. Speaker, could the Honourable Minister of Housing, Diversity and Inclusion tell this House about the impact of this support will have on the lives of...
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable Member for his question, but also for his strong advocacy on this really important issue. We understand as a government that Canadians are facing more pressures when it comes to paying the rent. That is why we introduced legislation to provide a top-up of $500 to the Canada Housing Benefit, a top-up that will help 1.8 million Canadian renters pay their rent. And I'm pleased to share with this House that this legislation has now received royal assent, and payments will launch at the end of the year. In this side of the House, Canadians know that our government always has their backs.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
The terrorist regime in Iran killed 55 Canadian citizens, and tens and thousands of Canadians gather in solidarity, the people fighting for their freedom in Iran. The IRGC is threatening Canadians on Canadian soil. Our security agency is sounding the alarm bells. These hostile activities undermine our national security. The Prime Minister knows of these lethal threats on innocent Canadians. It's time to end the platitudes and the empty rhetoric. When will the government prioritize the safety and security of Canadians and list the IRGC as the terrorist organization that they are?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we believe in action, and that's why we have an effective range of sanctions which are taking place on those who commit the atrocities in Iran. Because of these new sanctions, the framework we have put in place, we're able to target the core leadership of the Iranian regime. They'll not be able to hide in Canada. They'll not be able to hide anywhere. Their assets will be frozen in Canada. The message is clear. There's no place for them in Canada.
The Honourable Member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, Global News reported on November 7th that the Prime Minister had been briefed last January about federal candidates receiving money from Beijing. We started asking questions a week later on November 14th, but it took till yesterday, November 20th, for the Prime Minister to say, quote, "I do not have any information, nor have I been briefed on any federal candidates receiving money from China," end quote. Why did it take the Prime Minister 2 weeks to say that he had not been briefed on election candidates receiving money from Beijing?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to be unequivocally clear that Canadians can count on our government to remain vigilant when it comes to safeguarding free and fair elections in Canada. As my honourable colleague knows, we had an independent body look very closely at the allegations of foreign interference and confirmed that that election was free and fair. But we remain soberly aware of the threats that hostile actors pose, which is why we're cracking down on foreign funding which could influence elections, which is why we will continue to leverage every single authority at our disposal to protect fair and free elections in Canada. Thank you very much.
Honourable member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, the 2011 election was free and fair, but that didn't prevent an investigation from taking place about the Guelph robocall scandal. Yesterday, the Prime Minister also said, quote, "I've asked my officials to examine these media reports and give all possible answers, everything they can, to the parliamentary committee that's looking into this," end quote. Will the government assure this House that the Procedure and House Affairs Committee will get all the answers and all the documents they are seeking and not defy the committee, this House, and you, Mr. Speaker, as they did with the Winnipeg lab documents?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as you heard the Prime Minister say, of course we're going to cooperate with the Parliamentary Committee when it comes to disclosing all of the allegations that have been addressed by an independent body, which confirmed that the election in 2019 was both free and fair, Mr. Speaker. And I want to assure my colleague and all members in the House that this is not a partisan issue, that every member in this House has to work together to safeguard all of our democratic institutions, including elections, so that every Canadian can have their voice represented in this chamber. Mr. Speaker, we will spare no effort in securing that objective. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. 2 weeks after the allegations of Global News, the Prime Minister finally denied being specifically aware of the clandestine network of 11 candidates. The PM was asked to give all the information that they can share with the Parliamentary Committee. Can the Prime Minister confirm that all the documents will be shared with the Proc Committee and that they will not use their majority coalition to hide documents like the Liberals did during the Winnipeg debacle? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, the government respects the process for parliamentary committees, and of course we will collaborate with the committee to conduct a review, but we've already launched an independent and nonpartisan process that confirmed the results of the 2019 election and said that they were free and fair, and we will continue to use all the tools to safeguard all our democratic institutions, including elections. The Honourable Member for Avignon, La Matisse, Matane, Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, at the end of COP27, the Minister of the Environment said that he was disappointed that we did not go further. But it's his fault that we didn't go further. He fought to prevent countries from writing in the final declaration that fossil fuel use has to be reduced. He censored countries that wanted to acknowledge the obvious, namely that we must reduce our dependence on oil and gas. Is that Canada's role in the fight against climate change, censoring countries that want to succeed? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I heard a lot of praise coming from the international delegations on Canada's various efforts at COP27. And Mr. Speaker, you get no argument from this side of the House. There is more to do, and that's why we've invested $9.1 billion in our emissions reduction plan, why we're capping oil and gas emissions, why we're eliminating fossil fuel subsidies, we're investing in clean technology, Mr. Speaker. We want to take advantage of that $2.5 trillion clean energy economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I just want to remind the honourable members that it is not an Olympic event where you hold up the score. That is a prop, and it can get you thrown out of the House. I just want to point that out to all of you.
The honourable member for Avignon-La-Matisse-Matane, Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, at the same time that the Minister of the Environment was censoring the planet at COP27, Canada was continuing its efforts to turn Newfoundland into an oil Klondike. 5 oil companies have been authorized to dig around Baie du Nord for new oil. The Liberals have the nerve to justify this by saying that we'll always need oil for its byproducts like bicycle chain oil or latex gloves. This is no joke. It's the parliamentary secretary that said that. Mr. Speaker, in order to use the billions of barrels that they want to extract in Newfoundland, how many jars of Vaseline will they have to produce? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's very important. We do have a comprehensive and aggressive plan to fight climate change. Of course, we have to reduce GHGs. We have to work with our allies like we have done at COP27. And we have to make sure that there is a prosperous future for Canadians. We have to accelerate our energy transition, and our plan is doing exactly that.
The honourable member for Fundy Royal.
Mr. Speaker, earlier today, Statistics Canada reported that the homicide rate in Canada is the highest it's been since 2005, the last year that the Liberals were in government, in their previous government. In fact, 32% violent crime has risen since these Liberals last took government. But now they want to make it worse. They're letting violent criminals back onto the street after committing serious drug, gang, and gun crime. Will the minister listen to communities, to the police, to victims, and abandon his plan to let violent criminals back onto the streets?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, Bill C-5 received historic royal assent last Thursday, and for the first time, Mr. Speaker, we have given back to judges the power to make the punishment fit the crime and allowing all of the judicial system to focus more closely on the serious crimes that the honourable member is referring to. Mr. Speaker, this is a crucial step past the failed Conservative policies that have only led to the over-incarceration of Black and Indigenous peoples in the criminal justice system. Mr. Speaker, we're moving forward in the right direction for a more just Canada.
The honourable member for Fundy Royal.
Mr. Speaker, that's just factually incorrect. The mandatory minimum penalties this government's eliminating were mandatory minimums put in place by the Prime Minister's father. So when he speaks under this government, the maximum sentences are increasing, maximum sentences of 10 years or more. Do you know how often that's been given out? 0% of the time. So when this minister talks about increasing maximum penalties, what he's really saying is we're not going to do anything about violent crime. Will the minister please abandon his soft on crime approach and take gun crime seriously in this country?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I would invite the honourable member to read Bill C-21, which is our attack on gun crime, Mr. Speaker, in which we increase the maximum penalties for very serious gun offences. Mr. Speaker, another important part of Bill C-5 was the reintroduction of the possibility of conditional sentence orders, which allows, again, Mr. Speaker, our judges, based on the person in front of them, to actually fashion a punishment that fits the crime and, again, concentrate our valuable judicial resources on serious crimes. It's a direction that even Justice Michael Moldaver has exhorted us to do, because that's what the system...
The Honourable Member, l'Honourable...
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. When you listen to the Liberals, they seem to live in a world where everything is fine and nothing is wrong. But let me bring them back to reality. After 7 years under this Liberal government, the violent crime rate in Canada has increased by 32%. Yes, 32%. And what's the response to that? The adoption of Bill C-5, which abolishes minimum sentences for legal importation of firearms. We really have to be out of the loop. When will they put violent criminals and protect honest Canadians and do their job? Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what we're doing. For the first time in the history of our country, Mr. Speaker, we are going to repeal minimum sentences and give the judges the flexibility to make the punishment fit the crime. Mr. Speaker, we had to get rid of the failed Conservative policy that did nothing but lead to the over-incarceration of Blacks and Indigenous peoples in our system. With Bill C-5, Mr. Speaker, which received royal assent last Thursday, we are going towards a fairer and more equitable country.
Yukon.
Monsieur le Président, le don d'organes et
Speaker, organ and tissue donation is an important part of our healthcare system. In the last session of Parliament, Bill C-210 was unanimously passed, allowing Canadians to indicate on their income tax return their desire to receive information about organ and tissue donation from their provincial or territorial government. Can the Minister of National Revenue tell us more about where we are now in terms of working with the provinces and territories? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague from the Yukon for his question and for the work he's doing on behalf of his constituents. And I'm happy to announce that Nunavut and Ontario have agreed to participate in the organ and tissue donation initiative. This initiative will begin with this territory and province in the next reporting period. And therefore, we will work with other provinces and territories to address the donation shortage and increase the potential to save lives, Mr. Speaker.
Member for South Shore, St. Margaret's.
The Hortons could not afford a home in Ontario, so they found their dream home on a lake in Nova Scotia. The kids love skating and swimming on the lake. Life was good until this year. The increased cost of everything, like a 68% increase in the cost to heat a home in Nova Scotia, forced the Hortons to have to choose between paying their mortgage and heating their home. The Hortons want to know, why won't this Liberal government do the right thing and cancel their planned carbon tax on home heating?
The Honourable Minister, Parliamentary.
Motion, Mr. Speaker. You know, there's been some discussion today about the fact that there is the problem is a carbon tax. Well, the good news is there is no tax on carbon in Canada. There's a price on carbon pollution. That's the problem. The problem are emissions, not a price on carbon. Now, this very day, Mr. Speaker,
The Honourable Parliamentary, step from the top, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Now, some people are saying that the problem is our price on carbon pollution. That's not the problem. The problem is emissions. Every decision we take with regard to the environment on this side is about reducing emissions. Just this very day, the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship in Nova Scotia announced a program to help Nova Scotian families and other families to switch their oil heating furnaces to heat pumps. This is exactly the kind of action that we're taking that both solves the affordability problem for Nova Scotian families and lowers emissions, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for South Shore, St. Margaret's.
Well, this member knows that heat pumps don't work when it gets below -10. Right. He should do his homework. Right. The Liberal inflation is causing the Hortons to have to sell their home and move to a smaller place. They are working harder and falling further behind. They want to save a little money at the end of the month, but home heating increases are eating up their paychecks. Melody Horton has a simple question. Why won't this Liberal government do the right thing and cancel their planned carbon tax on home heating?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, you know it doesn't work when it comes to climate action, climate inaction. And what we saw in Nova Scotia today is action, exactly the kind of action that this government is committed to. And if I could offer Ms. Horton some advice, if her MP can't connect her to this new program, she can talk to me.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Les Chemins, Lévis. Mr. Speaker, because of Liberal-induced inflation, Canadians are struggling. With winter coming, it's already cold. Canadians are having a hard time heating and paying their bills. Canadians need help now. And they cannot pay more. our leader and my colleagues and myself from the Conservative Party have a very simple solution. Remove the carbon tax from Canadian home heating bills. Will the Liberals show some compassion and follow our recommendation? The Honourable Minister of Tourism. Mr. Speaker, our government has implemented a plan to fight climate change. But, Mr. Speaker, I can tell them that the only plan that the Conservatives and their leader have to make life more affordable is to incite Canadians to invest in cryptocurrency. And, Mr. Speaker, the roles and responsibilities of a leader have consequences. When will he apologize, their leader apologize, because some people spent their life savings because they followed his advice? That's criminal.
Or Hamilton Mountain.
Speaker, with one of the world's most comprehensive and detailed climate plans, a wealth of natural resources, and a skilled workforce, Canada is establishing itself as a global supplier of choice for clean energy in a net zero world. With governments worldwide looking for reliable, affordable, non-emitting forms of energy, could the minister please inform this House on actions taken by the government to increase clean fuel production in this country?
Great question. The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, thank you to the member for Hamilton Mountain for her very thoughtful question and for the work she does on behalf of her constituents each and every day. Clean fuels like hydrogen will play a crucial role in fighting climate change, and our government is taking concrete action to support the development of the sector. Last week in Vancouver, I announced $800 million in project funding to advance Canada's clean fuel sector for 60 clean fuel funding projects across the country. These projects will not only bolster Canadian competitiveness in the clean fuel space at a time of rising global demand, they will also create sustainable jobs and grow the economy, all while lowering emissions and protecting the environment for future generations.
The Honourable Member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, this government is sitting idly by while Canadians with disabilities live in poverty and die. Liberals move quickly when supporting their wealthy friends, but tell people with disabilities that help is years away. A growing number of persons with disabilities are losing hope as they contemplate medical assistance in dying, not because they want to die, Mr. Speaker, but because they can no longer afford to live. Why are the Liberals okay with this?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with C-22 and the Canada Disability Benefit, we have an opportunity in this House to bring about once-in-a-generation change and lift hundreds of thousands of working-age Canadians with disabilities out of poverty. And that's exactly the work that is just wrapping up at committee. And I look forward to having it back in the House for third reading. I look forward to once again having all party support. This could be transformative for our country, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, it needs to be said there's no such thing as a credible climate plan that doesn't include phasing out oil and gas while supporting affected workers. At COP27, the federal government claimed at the last minute to support text to phase down unabated fossil fuels, yet back home, it approved new oil exploration permits off the coast of Newfoundland. Is this government ready to talk seriously about equitably phasing out fossil fuels, or are they going to continue to protect the profits of their friends in the oil and gas industry?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, this government is entirely committed to the fight against climate change. It has been something that we have been working on for the past 7 years. We have done so with our allies around the world, in Europe, in Japan, in South Korea, and with countries across the globe. It is a critically important issue. It is something that we actually have invested enormous amounts of time, energy, and resources in doing. Canada has one of the most detailed climate plans in the world. We have an aggressive target. We are absolutely fundamentally committed to doing so, but doing so in a manner that recognizes this is a transition, recognizes that we actually have to ensure prosperity and jobs for future generations, and we are doing just that.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for questions today, and don't see anybody getting up on a point of order. Tabling of documents. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Standing Order 36.8a, I have the honour to table in both official languages the government's responses to 6 petitions. These returns will be tabled in an electronic format.
Thank you. And I'm just going to ask everyone to, there we go. Thank you. Very good. Jeez, it's an autopilot. This is wonderful. Introduction of government bills. Déclaration de ministre. Reports from interparliamentary delegations. Présentation de rapport de comité. L'honorable député de Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, Westmount.